I'm Alan Spears with Occupy Democrats, and if you're anything like me, you have a bit of dread for the upcoming election in this November. Yes, we've made no qualms about mentioning our distaste here on Occupy Democrats for Donald Trump and the dangers that he presents to this country. Now, this is hardly news if you've been on the channel for more than 5 minutes, but it should be noted that a number of different people are stepping forward now as we get closer to the election and decrying Donald Trump. One of the most notable voices to step forward recently is legendary American documentarian Ken Burns. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Ken Burns, he's an American producer and filmmaker that has created some of the most incredibly well-produced and highly informational and researched documentaries that have ever been made. He was also recently asked to speak at the Brandeis University graduation ceremony and had a number of different things to state about the upcoming election this November. Now, Ken Burns is incredibly well respected among numerous different circles and is well known, of course, for his documentaries, not only because of their production's quality, but because they are also highly informative and introduce little to no bias in the storytelling. So when Burns goes to the podium and he relays these fears and these concerns about the election coming up in November and how there's really only one vote to move our country forward with any semblance of hope, you really should listen to the man. This is a man who's not a political correspondent. He's not someone who works for any one party. He is a filmmaker who values information and research and puts quality above all. Now, in the clip I'm about to show you, Burns magnificently articulates himself in his concerns with the November election. Now, one of the things that Burns addresses is that our country is fairly young, at least compared to the rest of the world, and that there is still a lot left to learn and grow into as a nation. And with a man like Donald Trump at the head of our country, there's only one way for us to go, and that is straight down to the bottom. Take a look and see what Burns had to say.
Which brings me to a moment I've dreaded and forces me to suspend my long-standing attempt at neutrality. There is no real choice this November. There is only the perpetuation, however flawed and feeble you might perceive it, of our fragile 249-year-old experiment, or the entropy that will engulf and destroy us if we take the other route. When, as Mercy Otis Warren would say, the checks of conscience are thrown aside and a deformed picture of the soul is revealed. The presumptive Republican nominee is the opioid of all opioids, an easy cure for what some believe is the solution to our myriad pains and problems, when in fact, with him you end up re-enslaved with an even bigger problem, a worse affliction and addiction, a bigger delusion, James Baldwin would say, the author and finisher of our national existence, our national suicide, as Mr. Lincoln prophesies. Do not be seduced by easy equalization. There is nothing equal about this equation. We are at an existential crossroads in our political and civic lives. This is a choice that could not be clearer.
You know, sometimes I really wish that Ken Burns could just be our president. What an incredibly well-articulated and perfect summary of the issues that plague us and loom over us as we move into the November election. But he's absolutely right, and this is absolutely something we need to do better about facing together. Our country is a democracy that is incredibly fragile. Donald Trump is certainly not the first person to come in and try to upend our democracy for his own power and his own gain, and he certainly won't be the last. It is the responsibility of all of us within our democracy to look at these political candidates that come to the stage, that present themselves, and try to look beneath the surface of what they present us and realize whether or not these people are in it for their own political gain, for their own power, or do they have the country's best interest at heart? There is absolutely no choice in November. It is a choice between democracy and a choice between an authoritarian regime. And this is it. This is what Burns articulated and alluded to, and what we must all decide together as a country. Are we going to vote for the candidate that supports democracy, for freedom, for righteousness, or are we going to vote for the candidate who's in it for himself, for the power, and wants to establish an American empire? And one of the things that I hadn't considered until Burns mentioned it is that Donald Trump is essentially an opioid for the Republicans. He's a man that tries his best to project a sense of power and offer solutions to problems that, frankly, he started or helped create. He's a man that tries to project himself as a one-stop solution for all the issues the country is facing and all the woes, and the truth of the matter is there is no such individual. Neither democracies nor any sort of authoritarian country can have any and all of their problems removed by one singular person. It takes a village. Now, pretty much any system of government looks fantastic on paper. The problem is when you introduce the human element or the human component into the system. Humans can be just as greedy and cruel as they can be kind and generous. So when you have a democracy and you have the power in the hands of the people and they can use that power for good and for their own interest, it serves to elevate everyone around them. And look, I don't want to make it seem like our democracy is perfect. It is certainly not. And there is so much room for improvement. And maybe if some of the older politicians would care to retire, that would be so fantastic. Thank you. But look, it is not going to get us anywhere further, anywhere better if we upend our democracy, get rid of it, and replace it with an authoritarian regime led by Donald Trump. The man's an egotistical narcissist and has nothing but his own self-interest in mind. He's not going to offer you the solutions or the alleviation that he promises when he's campaigning. He is a man that is only interested in it for himself. He is not going to give you what you need and what you want, I assure you. And in all seriousness, I understand why the blue-collar worker and these Republicans do resonate with Donald Trump's message. Donald Trump is an outsider and a businessman, and not a career politician who's been bought or paid for or had to do a ton of backroom deals, at least in theory. But these people think that because he's an outsider, because he's not this career politician or not a long-standing Republican Party member, that somehow that makes him any better or more qualified, when it doesn't. And truly, my heart does go out to the working class people that think that Donald Trump is going to be their man, that have maybe struggled under certain policies that have been introduced or revoked, or have had to deal with any number of different issues. But the truth of the matter is, Donald Trump is not going to be your guy. And like Kim Burns said, there is not going to be some sort of easy equalization for us all. Trying to find true equality is not going to be this walk in the park, and it's not going to be something that we can do overnight. But as we've continued to work and as we've continued to strive for this equalization in our country and to try to bring everyone as close to a level playing field as possible, we've made great improvements and we've done a lot of good so far. And we've had missteps, absolutely. We've made our mistakes and we've had to learn some pretty hard lessons along the way. But for every one step back we take, we typically make 2 steps forward. And I recognize that there's a lot of people out there whose lives are at a very critical point or a very low point. And that when you have people, even like me, saying that we need to be patient and strive for equality, that can be very off-putting because they don't have time to wait. And I understand that. And it's hard. But Donald Trump is not going to be your guy. He's not going to find the solutions that you need. I don't think that Ken Burns, nor myself, nor anyone else out there has all of the answers or solutions to our country's ailments. And if they say that they do, they're probably lying and trying to grift you. So once again, we are at a critical point in our country where this upcoming election is seriously the most important election to date. I know we've said that last election in 2020, but the truth of the matter is now it has even higher stakes than it was in 2020. Unfortunately, this election is probably going to come down to the wire and going to be very close, so every vote does matter. And I know it can be long, I know it can be boring, but bring your phone, bring an audiobook, bring your music, do something while you wait, and cast your vote and make your voice heard this November.